Nightmare Luffy. Nightmare Luffy is one of the rarest transformations in the entire series. It occurs in episode 370 during the Thriller Bark arc, when 100 shadows are forcibly inserted into Luffy's body. The shadows drastically alter his appearance, turning his skin blue, enlarging his physique, and erasing his trademark smile. In this form, Luffy demonstrates enough power to defeat Oars, a zombie giant that had earlier overwhelmed the crew. The strength boost is temporary, however, as the shadows return to their owners after roughly 10 minutes. This transformation is unique because it does not rely on Luffy's own abilities, but instead on an outside ritual, making it a one-time phenomenon that has never reappeared. The rarity of this state makes it one of the most memorable moments in One Piece, showing how outside forces can temporarily elevate Luffy far beyond his normal limits. Afro Luffy and Watergun Luffy. Afro Luffy appears during the Davy Back fight against Foxy in episode 217. Usopp gives Luffy an afro, claiming it will unlock his hidden power and sharpen his fighting spirit. While comical, the transformation proves effective as Luffy wins the duel. Fans note that other strong characters also have afros, inspiring theories that the hairstyle itself symbolizes strength. The significance of this form lies not in raw power but in how it showcases Luffy's reliance on belief, morale, and symbolic confidence to push through battles. Watergun Luffy emerges in Luffy's battle against Crocodile. To counter Crocodile's sand powers, Luffy fills his body with water and sprays it back out like a weapon. This improvised technique highlights Luffy's creativity but has limited practical value, as it doesn't lead to victory. Still, the form demonstrates how his rubber physiology allows him to use his body in unconventional ways, turning a natural weakness against Crocodile into a temporary advantage. These forms together emphasize Luffy's inventiveness in combat, even when strategies border on absurd. Giant Luffy and Mini Luffy. Giant Luffy debuts in episode 578 when Luffy accidentally swallows Lily the Glutton, a character capable of altering her size at will. When she expands inside him, his body stretches with her, creating an enormous Luffy with increased durability. The form is striking because it bends the rules of his devil fruit powers through an external catalyst, similar to Nightmare Luffy. In battle, this giant state allows him to endure heavy blows, including taking a rocket strike without harm, proving it has real combat utility despite its bizarre origin. Mini Luffy, on the other hand, is a side effect of using Gear Third. After inflating his bones to massive size, Luffy must expel the air. In early uses, his body overcompensates and shrinks him down to childlike proportions. This state temporarily reduces his combat ability and leaves him vulnerable, though as Luffy grows stronger, the drawback gradually disappears. The contrast between Giant and Mini Luffy underscores the risks of pushing his devil fruit beyond natural limits, showing that every experiment with his powers carries both strengths and weaknesses. Gear Second. Gear Second marks Luffy's first major self-created power-up, debuting during the Enies Lobby arc. By forcefully accelerating his blood flow, Luffy increases the delivery of oxygen and nutrients throughout his body. This drastically boosts his speed and strength to superhuman levels, allowing him to move faster than most opponents can visually track. The technique works only because Luffy's rubber body can withstand the extreme blood pressure which would otherwise kill an ordinary human. Gear Second comes at a price, however, as overuse drains his stamina and can paralyze him temporarily after combat. Despite the drawback, it cemented Luffy as a fighter who pushes past his natural biology to invent new abilities. The visual hallmark of Gear Second, steam pouring from his body, remains one of the most iconic images in One Piece. Gear Third. Gear Third emerges shortly after Gear Second when Luffy needs raw destructive power rather than speed. By biting his thumb and blowing air directly into his bones, he inflates his skeletal structure and turns his limbs enormous. A single strike from this form can demolish a battleship or a massive fortress wall, showcasing power on a scale that few human characters can match. However, the form initially carries a major drawback. Once the air is released, Luffy shrinks into Mini Luffy, leaving him weakened and vulnerable. Over time, his body adapts, and this side effect fades, allowing him to use Gear Third more reliably in later arcs. The technique highlights how Luffy exploits the unique properties of his rubber physiology to reach levels of power no one else could achieve. It also marks a turning point, where his improvisational creativity becomes a structured system of gears. Haki forms. During the 2-year time skip, Luffy trains under Silver's Rayleigh and masters 3 distinct forms of Haki, each enhancing his combat effectiveness in unique ways. Conqueror's Haki allows him to exert sheer willpower to intimidate or incapacitate weaker opponents instantly, something only a small fraction of characters in the world can achieve. Observation Haki grants him near precognition, letting him sense attacks before they happen and react with perfect timing. Armament Haki, perhaps the most practical in combat, coats his body in invisible armor, capable of deflecting blades and amplifying the force of his punches. Mastering all three within just 2 years is extraordinary, as most fighters struggle to achieve even one form in a lifetime. Haki marks the transition from purely devil fruit-based powers to a layered skill set, broadening Luffy's arsenal and preparing him for battles against top-tier adversaries. Plot Armor Luffy. Plot Armor Luffy, Brainless Form versus Enel. During the Skypiea arc, Luffy faces one of his most dangerous opponents, Enel, the self-proclaimed god who wields the powers of the Goro Goro no Mi, a lightning-based devil fruit. Enel also possesses an extremely advanced form of observation haki, allowing him to predict opponents' moves with near-perfect accuracy. Against an enemy who could essentially read minds, traditional strategies were useless. Luffy's rubber body gave him a natural immunity to lightning, but the real advantage came from his tendency to fight without overthinking. By relying purely on reflexes and instinct, he became unpredictable, creating what fans call his brainless form. This state wasn't a transformation in the physical sense, but it illustrates how Luffy's unorthodox mindset and impulsive combat style can outmaneuver even overwhelming abilities. It demonstrates that unpredictability itself can be a kind of hidden weapon. Gear 4th, Snakeman. Snakeman is one of the three variations of Gear 4th, designed specifically to maximize speed and pressure in combat. By focusing armament haki on his arms and legs, Luffy enhances both striking power and acceleration. In this form, his body becomes leaner, allowing for greater mobility compared to other Gear 4th variants. The defining feature of Snakeman is the nature of his punches. Once launched, his fists continue accelerating and changing direction until they land, making them extremely difficult to evade. This was most clearly demonstrated in his battle against Charlotte Katakuri, where Snakeman's speed allowed him to keep up with Katakuri's own advanced observation haki. However, Snakeman sacrifices defense, as haki reinforcement is concentrated only on specific limbs rather than the whole body. It is a high-risk, high-reward form built around relentless offense. Gear 4th, Bound Man. Bound Man is the first and most well-known Gear 4th transformation, created when Luffy infused massive amounts of haki into his body and inflated it like a balloon. The result is a warped, muscular frame with exaggerated proportions and spring-like elasticity. Boundman provides extraordinary raw power, capable of shattering mountains with a single blow, while also granting limited flight through constant bouncing. The combination of rubber compression and armament haki produces explosive attacks, allowing Luffy to overpower armies or giant beasts. Yet Boundman has a critical weakness. Its momentum is difficult to control, leaving Luffy ricocheting uncontrollably if his movement is not carefully managed. Additionally, maintaining this form consumes large amounts of energy, forcing Luffy back into his base form after extended use. Boundman represents both the peak of destructive force and the limits of sustainability in Luffy's arsenal. Gear 4th, Tankman. Tankman is the rarest variation of Gear 4th, seen only once during Luffy's battle against Charlotte Cracker. Unlike Snakeman or Boundman, which emphasize speed and offensive power, Tankman focuses entirely on defense. Luffy achieves this form by consuming an enormous amount of food, which combines with his rubber body and armament haki to create a massive, impenetrable barrier around his torso. In this state, sword strikes, blunt force, and even Cracker's biscuit soldiers cannot penetrate his defenses. Tankman can also weaponize his mass, absorbing opponents and launching them back out with devastating force. However, the drawback is significant. Luffy becomes nearly immobile, sacrificing agility in exchange for protection. This makes the form highly situational and explains why it has only been used once. Tankman reveals Luffy's ability to adapt his Gear 4th framework to different battle requirements, even at the cost of speed. Base form Luffy. Although overshadowed by his gears and transformations, Luffy's base form is a crucial stage of his development. For nearly 300 episodes before discovering Gear 2nd or Gear 3rd, Luffy relied solely on his natural rubber abilities, determination, and raw combat instincts. During this time, he achieved impressive victories, including defeating Enel, whose lightning powers were nullified by Luffy's rubber physiology, and overcoming opponents like Captain Kuro, who specialized in bladed weapons, an inherent weakness for Luffy. Over the years, his base form continued to improve as his body adapted to punishment and his combat sense sharpened. Even after unlocking higher gears, Luffy frequently returns to base form during fights to conserve energy or rely on endurance. This highlights that his fundamental strength does not come from transformations alone, but from years of training, creativity, and experience. Gear 5th, Awakening/Nika Form. Gear 5th is Luffy's most powerful and revolutionary transformation, first revealed during his battle with Kaido. Triggered after his near-death and revival, it represents the awakening of his devil fruit. For years believed to be the gum fruit, it is actually the human fruit, model Nika. This rare fruit grants Luffy the power of the mythical sun god Nika, embodying freedom, creativity, and laughter. In Gear 5th, Luffy's body becomes cartoonishly flexible, with abilities that defy normal logic. He can stretch, compress, and reshape not only himself but also his surroundings, turning the battlefield into a rubber-like domain. Kaido described the abilities as resembling something out of a picture book, and Eiichiro Oda himself confirmed that imagination is the only limit to this form. Gear 5th grants overwhelming speed, strength, and durability, but it comes at a cost. Prolonged use drains Luffy's life force. This transformation redefines both his identity and his place in the One Piece world, elevating him from a strong pirate to a legendary figure tied to myth and destiny. Champion Luffy. Champion Luffy appears during the Impel Down arc, when Luffy faces Magellan, the warden whose devil fruit allows him to produce and control deadly poison. In their first encounter, Magellan's poison nearly killed Luffy, forcing him to find a creative solution in their rematch. With the help of Mr. 3, who wields the Doru Doru no Mi wax powers, Luffy coats his arms and legs in hardened wax armor. The armor functions like steel plating, shielding him from Magellan's otherwise fatal toxins. In this temporary form, Luffy can strike freely without risking contact with poison. Though not a true transformation he achieved on his own, Champion Luffy demonstrates his resourcefulness and willingness to combine powers with allies in desperate situations. It is a reminder that some of his greatest victories come from collaboration rather than solo strength. Old Luffy, strong version. The creator of One Piece, Eiichiro Oda, once illustrated potential future versions of Luffy at age 40 and 60, depending on whether he succeeds in finding the One Piece. The strong version, often called Old Luffy, strong, depicts him as a rugged, powerful figure resembling his grandfather Garp. He appears physically imposing, with a confident expression that suggests he continued training and fighting even into old age. This hypothetical form represents the best-case outcome for Luffy's journey, a legendary pirate who achieved his dream and grew stronger with time. Although non-canon, it reflects the enduring spirit of the character, who thrives on resilience and never loses his vitality. Old Luffy, weak version, and non-canon possibilities. The alternate future Oda illustrated is much darker. If Luffy fails to achieve his dream of finding the One Piece, he is shown as a broken man, toothless, balding, and stooped with age. This version reflects wasted potential, a cautionary image of what could happen if his endless optimism and ambition collapse into failure. While only a speculative design, it carries symbolic weight about the importance of pursuing dreams wholeheartedly. Beyond this, there are also scattered non-canon forms and what-if transformations created for promotional material or special projects. These include gag designs or alternate timelines where Luffy's powers manifest differently. Though not part of the main story, they reveal the playful flexibility of his character and how fans and creators alike imagine his future. Together, the strong and weak old man versions underline the stakes of Luffy's lifelong pursuit. The path he chooses will shape not only his fate, but his very identity. I'm going to keep dropping more of these cartoon breakdowns, so if that's your thing, stick around. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for being here, and catch you next time.